Hello and good day. Let's continue the discussion in cost volume profit analysis or CVP analysis. In this video, I'm going to discuss the margin of safety and degree of operating leverage. Let's start with the margin of safety or MOS. Margin of safety is the difference between actual sales and break-even sales. In other words, para makompute yung margin of safety, i-deduct natin yung break-even sales sa sales. Margin of safety is equal to sales minus break-even sales. Take note na yung break-even sales ay other term for break-even point in pesos. So do not be confused with the term break-even sales, since ang ibig sabihin niyan ay break-even point in pesos. Kapag sinabi namang break-even volume, ang ibig sabihin nun ay break-even point in units. Margin of safety indicates the maximum amount by which sales could decline without incurring a loss. Meaning to say, tinawag siyang margin of safety kasi kahit mabawasan yung revenue or sales by this amount, wala pa ring mai-incur na loss. Isa sa kinocompute dito ay yung tinatawag na margin of safety ratio or MSR. Margin of safety ratio or MSR is equal to margin of safety divided by sales. Kung merong margin of safety ratio, meron ding break-even sales ratio. Break-even sales ratio is break-even sales divided by sales. Take note na kapag pinagsama natin yung margin of safety ratio or break-even sales ratio, that is always equal to 100%. So by deriving from this formula, margin of safety ratio is equal to 100% minus break-even sales ratio. And of course, break-even sales ratio is equal to 100% minus margin of safety ratio. We can also get the profit ratio by using the margin of safety ratio. Just simply multiply the contribution margin ratio by the margin of safety ratio in order to compute for the profit ratio. Let's try to apply those formulas by answering a problem. G Company has break-even sales of 528,000 pesos. The variable cost ratio is 60%, while the profit ratio is 8%. Requirements determine the following. First, fixed costs. Second, sales. Third, profit. Fourth, margin of safety. Fifth, margin of safety ratio. And sixth, break-even sales ratio. Let's start with requirement number 1, determine the fixed costs. Ang break-even sales or break-even point in pesos ay 528,000 pesos. Pwede nating gamitin yung formula ng break-even sales or break-even point in pesos para makompute natin yung fixed costs. Ang formula ay break-even sales is equal to fixed costs divided by contribution margin ratio. Since ang variable cost ratio ay 60%, automatic na ang contribution margin ratio ay 40%. That is 100% na sales ratio minus 60% na variable cost ratio. Pwede na nating i-substitute yung amount sa formula para makuha ang fixed costs. 528,000 pesos is equal to fixed costs divided by 40%. That will become fixed costs is equal to 528,000 pesos times 40%. 528,000 pesos times 40%, that is equal to 211,200 pesos. And that is the answer in requirement number 1, fixed costs. Next, requirement number 2, determine the sales. Ano na ulit yung formula under variable costing? Sales minus variable costs, that is equal to contribution margin. Contribution margin minus fixed costs, that is equal to profit or net income. Ang sales, palagi yang 100%. Ang variable cost ratio ay 60%. So, ang contribution margin ratio ay 40%. Ang profit ratio ay 8%. I-squeeze natin yan para makuha yung fixed cost ratio. 40% minus 8%, that is equal to 32%. Base doon sa na-compute natin kanina, ang fixed costs ay 211,200 pesos. So, ang gagawin natin para ma-compute yung sales, 211,200 pesos divided by 32%. 211,200 pesos divided by 32%, that is equal to sales of 660,000 pesos. So our answer in requirement number 2 is 660,000 pesos. Next, requirement number 3, determine the profit. Ang sales ay 660,000 pesos at ang profit ratio ay 8%. To get the profit, simply multiply 660,000 pesos by 8%. 660,000 pesos times 8%, that is equal to profit of 52,800 pesos. So 52,800 pesos is our answer in requirement number 3. Next, requirement number 4, determine the margin of safety. Margin of safety is equal to sales minus break-even sales. Ang sales ay 660,000 pesos at ang break-even sales ay 528,000 pesos. 660,000 pesos minus 528,000 pesos, that is equal to 132,000 pesos. So, 132,000 pesos is our answer in requirement number 4. Next, requirement number 5, determine the margin of safety ratio. Margin of safety ratio is equal to margin of safety divided by sales. Ang margin of safety ay 132,000 pesos at ang sales ay 660,000 pesos. 132,000 pesos divided by 660,000 pesos, that is equal to 20%. And that is the margin of safety ratio. Our answer in requirement number 5 is 20%. Another way to compute for the margin of safety ratio is contribution margin ratio times margin of safety ratio is equal to profit ratio. By deriving from this formula, margin of safety ratio is equal to profit ratio divided by contribution margin ratio. Ang profit ratio ay 8% at ang contribution margin ratio ay 40%. 8% divided by 40%, that is equal to 20%. Next, requirement number 6, determine the break-even sales ratio. Break-even sales ratio is equal to break-even sales divided by sales. Ang break-even sales ay 528,000 pesos at ang sales ay 660,000 pesos. 528,000 pesos divided by 660,000 pesos, that is equal to break-even sales ratio of 80%. So our answer in requirement number 6 is 80%. Another way to compute for the break-even sales ratio is 100% minus the margin of safety ratio. Ang margin of safety ratio ay 20%. So 100% minus 20% na margin of safety ratio, that is equal to break-even sales ratio of 80%. Another tool in CVP analysis is the degree of operating leverage or DOL. Degree of operating leverage or DOL measures how a percentage change in sales will affect company profits. This is also known as operating leverage factor. Degree of operating leverage or DOL is equal to contribution margin divided by profit before tax. Take note that the profit that you are going to use is profit before tax. Kung ang given ay profit after tax or after tax profit, you need to compute first the profit before tax. The percentage change in sales times the degree of operating leverage is equal to the percentage change in profit before tax. As you can see, the degree of operating leverage is a multiplier. Meaning to say, if there is a percentage change in sales, ito yung imumultiply natin para malaman natin kung ano ba yung percentage change in profit before tax. Let us now apply the formulas by answering a problem. Following is the company's result of operations from its present sales level of 10,000 units. Sales 10,000 units at a selling price of 5 pesos per unit, 50,000 pesos. Variable costs 10,000 units at 3 pesos variable cost per unit, 30,000 pesos. Contribution margin 20,000 pesos. Fixed costs, 12,000 pesos, and the profit before tax is 8,000 pesos. Requirements, requirement number 1, determine the degree of operating leverage. And requirement number 2, if the company's sales would increase by 10%, its profit before tax would increase by how many percent? Let's start with requirement number 1, determine the degree of operating leverage. The degree of operating leverage is equal to contribution margin divided by profit before tax. Ang contribution margin ay 20,000 pesos at ang profit before tax ay 8,000 pesos. 20,000 pesos divided by 8,000 pesos, that is equal to 2.5. And that is the degree of operating leverage. Therefore, 2.5 is the answer in requirement number 1. Next, requirement number 2, if the company's sales would increase by 10%, its profit before tax would increase by how many percent? Since na-compute na natin kanina yung degree of operating leverage, imumultiply lang natin yung degree of operating leverage sa percentage change in sales para makuha natin yung percentage change in profit. Ang percentage change in sales ay 10% at ang degree of operating leverage ay 2.5. 10% times 2.5, that is equal to 25%. And that is the percentage change in profit. Meaning to say, kapag nag-increase yung sales ng 10%, mag-i-increase din yung profit ng 25%. I-check nga natin kung tama yung 25%. Ang present sales ay 50,000 pesos. Kung mag-i-increase yan by 10%, magiging 55,000 pesos. That is 50,000 pesos times 110%. 50,000 pesos times 110%, that is equal to 55,000 pesos. Or kung gusto ninyo, 50,000 pesos times 10%, that is equal to 5,000 pesos. Saka nyo siya idadagdag sa 50,000 pesos, and that is equal to 55,000 pesos. Ang present variable cost ay 30,000 pesos. Since tumaas yung sales ng 10%, tataas din yung variable cost ng 10%. Kung tataas yung 30,000 pesos ng 10%, magiging 33,000 pesos. That is 30,000 pesos times 110%. Or kung gusto ninyo, 30,000 pesos times 10%, that is 3,000 pesos plus 30,000 pesos. That is equal to 33,000 pesos. Ang present contribution margin ay 20,000 pesos. 50,000 pesos minus 30,000 pesos, that is equal to 20,000 pesos. Ang proposed contribution margin ay 22,000 pesos. 55,000 pesos minus 33,000 pesos, that is equal to 22,000 pesos. Next, fixed cost. Of course, constant yung total fixed cost regardless of the change in sales. So, 12,000 pesos pa rin ang fixed cost. Ang present profit ay 8,000 pesos at ang proposed profit ay 10,000 pesos. 20,000 pesos minus 12,000 pesos, that is equal to 8,000 pesos. 22,000 pesos minus 12,000 pesos, that is equal to 10,000 pesos. Now, para ma-compute yung percentage change in profit, 10,000 pesos minus 8,000 pesos divided by 8,000 pesos. 10,000 pesos minus 8,000 pesos, that is 2,000 pesos. 2,000 pesos divided by 8,000 pesos, that is equal to 25%. Therefore, yung 25% na percentage change in profit ay tama.